Hi everyone, welcome to Inner Story and Journaling. My name is Elisha Vihali and I'm so excited to have you here. So today I wanted to talk about the inner critic. And if you're a deep feeler or a creative of any kind, I think you're probably familiar with your inner critic. And I think deep feelers and creatives actually have like a stronger, more stubborn inner critic. And I think it's like because we're not really good at like the whole toxic positivity thing. So it's like when that inner critic comes, it's really hard to push it away. And it kind of sounds like when you're finally putting the finishing touches on your creative work, and it's like, ooh, this is so amateur. Who's going to buy this? Or it might be something like, at the end of a long day and you've done so much amazing things. You've been a listening ear, you were working, you were cleaning, you were cooking, you were being there for others, and all instead of, pointing that out to you and noticing all that, the inner critic is just like, oh my gosh, look at the couch. It's so messy. Like, why are there so many papers on the table? Um, and it's like, could you give me a break already? And it could be mean, it's relentless. And the question is, how do you deal with it? So I think like the classic advice is, kind of some form of fighting it, some form of pushing it away, some form of diminishing that inner critic and making it like it's not important and something like along those lines. And that's like I think that I would say is like the classic advice. Fight it, push it away, don't pay attention to it. You're awesome, you're amazing. And maybe it's because of that toxic positivity thing again, but for some reason, I think that doesn't work for a lot of deep feelers and creatives. And I know that for me, it never worked. Um, Maybe to like a very small extent, but like there came a point that sometimes like I felt like just doing that, it was actually making the inner critic louder and louder and louder and more insistent and more pushy and more bossy and even more mean. So I kind of figured, oh my, I better try another way. And that's kind of how that search started for me. And I was thrilled that I actually found answers. So don't fight. If you're not going to fight your inner critic, what's there to do with it instead? Um, okay, so I want to use a story metaphor for this. And it's from the animated Disney movie called How to Train Your Dragon. So in this movie, I remember I just like saw it on an airplane once and I was like, oh my gosh, I love it. Like right away, my mind went to like, this is such a powerful metaphor. Like, that's just the way my brain works. So, in this movie, it starts off in a Viking village, probably a long, long time ago. And the tradition of that village was to slay dragons. And of course, that was their tradition because dragons were a big problem. They were coming and stealing the sheep and just wreaking havoc. And it was like, whoever was able to kill more dragons, with their swords and their axes and whatever, like that Viking was like the star. And there was this one like little skinny Viking teenager. His, maybe preteen, probably around 13-ish. His name was Hiccup, and somehow he just like didn't have it in him. He couldn't kill a dragon, and definitely not with a sword or with an axe. And one of the problems for him was that his father was actually the chief of the village and like the most, awesome Viking killer. And, all the kids were going to school learning how to kill dragons. And he was just put like on the side to do other things. And it was embarrassing. And yet he kind of did have this like gift, like he was able to build things like really well. So he was trying to build like a catapult to kill dragons. Like he was trying to make all these interesting contraptions to kill a dragon. And lo and behold, he like made some like kind of catapult that like could shoot a rock into the sky or something like that. And this is all like within the first like 5 minutes of the movie, probably. And one time the dragons came and attacked the village, and he threw the catapults in the air, and lo and behold, he hit the most like mysterious I guess mysterious is the right word, mysterious dragon of all, called a Night Fury. And it was mysterious because no one had ever hit it before, and it would just like throw fireballs from the sky. It never came down um, to fight like man to man. And so he threw that catapult in the sky, and he saw like the Night Fury falling in the sky. But like the problem was is that he was the only one who saw that whole entire scenario. And instead, like it kind of caused this like domino effect where things like there was a dragon someone was about to kill, and then they couldn't kill it because stuff started falling and flying, and it just made a whole big mess. And the dragons, flew away with all the sheep, and he was blamed for causing havoc and destruction. So once again, it didn't work out for him very well. When he's like, I'm going to prove myself, and he goes out and he to the forest and says, I know I hit the Night Fury, I have to find it. And then lo and behold, he does find the Night Fury deep in the forest, and it's kind of like tied up and injured. Its tail isn't functioning properly. Its eyes are closed. First, he thought it was dead. And then it kind of opened its eyes, and he was like, oh my gosh. And then he was like, this is it. This is my moment. An injured Night Fury. I just have to kill it and bring it to the village. And I'm going to be the village superstar. So he takes his knife and he's about to kill the dragon. And by the way, if this is definitely spoiler alerts over here. So, and he's about to kill the dragon, and he like all of a sudden that dragon opens its eyes again, and he looks into the dragon's eyes, and he's just like, he can't do it. And he's like, I'm a coward, I can't do it. He like lowers the knife. But then something interesting starts happening instead. The dragon is still injured and can't really hurt him as much, at least. And he kind of keeps on coming back to the forest. He feeds the dragon. He kind of, makes like a little prosthetic for his tail. And he starts observing the dragon. And it's just very interesting. They slowly start becoming friends, and he learns how to fly on the dragon. And they really become close. And then, of course, the rest of the movie is about how he's going to introduce this new find to the village, because they're not going to be too happy. But that's like a separate story. The important part of the story for now is this beginning part where he doesn't kill the dragon. He starts to observe it, understand it, try to make friends with it. So I remember when I saw that, I was like, that's just like the perfect metaphor for how to deal with an inner critic. And really, an inner critic is, in my whole inner story system that I have created, which I want to, slowly present to you parts of it. I really call it saboteurs, and the inner critic is one of the saboteurs. I think I call it the flawless critic, actually. So it's really one of the saboteurs. There's different types of saboteurs, because being critical of oneself is not the only saboteur. There's people pleasing. There is toxic positivity, I would say, is a saboteur as well, actually. But since we started off with the inner critic, we could continue with the inner critic. And I think I chose that one because, like I said, it is one that a lot of deep feelers and creatives maybe struggle with the most, especially when it comes to artwork or writing. So, when it comes to the inner critic, our instinct is to fight with it, try to push it away. So the inner critic is one of the saboteurs. And, like I said, like it's kind of the way that we were taught, it's like kind of a negative character trait. If you want to think of it like that, like that's what a saboteur is. It's like a metaphor for a negative character trait that you might have, or I might have, anyone might have. So our instinct with dealing with saboteurs, and in this case, the inner critic, is that we're going to fight it, we're going to push it away. And in this, and I think that's like, that's like the dragon is like a metaphor for that, and I think that the age-old wisdom, or at least like surface level wisdom, has always been to fight it, to kill it, push it away. And I'm here to say, like, that is outdated. No. Um, and I think part of the reason why is because I think I'm not the only one that's noticing it's not working. Um, is like people, a lot of people are noticing that it makes it the saboteur, the inner critic, louder and more obnoxious. So the newest, latest advice is befriend that inner critic. And one of the best ways to befriend the inner critic is to interview it. So you might say interview it, and yes, I will say to interview it. And that's when you're going to pull out your journal and just start to interview your inner critic. And the thing about the inner critic and any saboteur is that, it's there for a reason. And it's almost like a messenger coming with a message, and it doesn't know how to give you that message, or it feels like the message is just like so urgent that it has to be so obnoxious. So it does it in like such an obnoxious way, but like it's really coming with a message. And maybe the problem is that sometimes it was a message that you needed to hear, like as a kid, as a young adult. And at that time, you didn't know about being friends with your inner critic or your saboteur, and you kind of pushed it away. You never heard the message. It didn't feel safe to listen to that message. So it's kind of like in a computer when there's just like a program that needs to be downloaded and it was never downloaded. And really, that message came at an earlier chapter of your life, and it was a message that you really needed to hear. And sometimes that message is still applicable in the present, or applicable to a certain extent in the present, and it was definitely applicable in the past. Like in the past, it could have been a protective voice. Like maybe that critical voice was, maybe there was a time that you created something and everyone laughed at it. And it was like, well, that's embarrassing. I'm going to be, rejected. I'm going to be thrown out of the group, and it's not safe. So there's a wall and a barrier that's created there. And the real point of interviewing it is to find out like what happened, like what's the message and why it's important. Because, and it's good to know, why is this message important? Because you have to kind of like download that program and figure out, like, is this message still applicable today, and to what extent? And then sometimes there is wisdom in what the inner critic is saying. Like, yeah, there is wisdom. Like, you don't want to just like throw out your creative work out there. You do want to make sure that it's, there's an audience for it. You do want to make sure that it's something that people need, that people will appreciate. And, it is good to like think about, like, before putting yourself out there, for example, like, is this something that people are going to want to buy? Now, when you start like overthinking and overthinking and overthinking, and then you never put out your work, that's also counterproductive, because then you're never going to figure out what people want and what people need. And you're never going to be able to express yourself. But, there is definitely a kernel of truth to that message and to what the inner critic is saying. So that's also another reason why I'm not like such a big fan of just like pushing away, fighting that inner dragon. So, and that's, you kind of have to learn how to fly with it, right? It's kind of like, oh, okay, I heard your message. I understand you. You have a point. Now you can transform into my flying dragon that I am going to fly on. And instead of you breathing fire on me and trying to kill me, and we're fighting all the time. Okay, so that's one thing that's very important. So see, another important point. So I just wanted to give you a few questions that you could use to interview your inner critic. And like I said, you could really interview any saboteur that you have, like any negative character flaw that you have. But if you want to work with the inner critic, since that's what we started with, so here are some questions for it. You can ask, what are you protecting me from? What are you afraid would happen, if X, Y, Z, like, like in the beginning when I said, like, you did so much amazing stuff, and then all it's noticing is the papers on the table. And it's like, what are you afraid is going to happen? Um, if those papers stay on the table, or if I just take a moment to pat myself on the back, like what's going to happen? When did you first learn this wasn't safe? And one of my favorite questions is, what do you need? So, like there's that voice saying, like, don't try, like, don't even bother. And maybe there's a whole story about how it was humiliated. Um, and once it feels understood, like that dragon in How to Train Your Dragon, it starts to soften and it starts to trust you. And then it's like, okay, great, like let's fly together. I'm going to now, help you to make the most amazing creative work that you've ever created. I'm now going to help you to create a schedule that's just like flowing, where you're able to give and receive, and that your workspace looks amazing and you're able to give, like you're going to be able to start to fly with it. And then like that whole, this is, the interviewing is like the beginning of the process. In inner story work, I kind of like to call it transforming the saboteur into an ally. So we're not going to go through that whole process, but this is definitely a part of the process that I wanted to talk about today. And um, and yes, that is basically the message for today. Don't, slaying inner dragons is so yesterday. The newest methods teach you how to befriend your inner dragon, to train it, and to learn how to fly with it. And um, to realize that self-sabotage is often misdirected protection, and the part of you that you've been trying to silence, maybe it's the part of you that once saved you. Like maybe that inner critic, there was a point where, go back in time. Maybe there was a point where you being so critical of yourself really saved you from a lot of harm, from social isolation or whatnot. And the point is to bring it into consciousness so you can now be the hero of your story, with the author of your story, and decide, what do I do next? What do I do with this? And how do I take this information into the chapter that I'm in? And often that means, okay, I don't want to be as critical of myself. But I want to kind of like download those messages and hear what it has to say, and maybe to talk to myself with more compassion. That could be one example. Okay, so I also just wanted to tell you that I created, if you're curious about the saboteurs, so I actually created a free quiz, and the free quiz is actually about discovering your story type. But each saboteur like lives within a story type. Each saboteur has its own story type. And if you're curious, like what patterns are kind of keeping you stuck and interfering with your life, so that would be a really fun quiz for you to take. And at the end of the quiz, I kind of put together the story types with the saboteurs and, the transformation process there. So if this was interesting for you, I'm going to put a link down below. It's on the homepage of my website. So I'm going to put a link to that you could sign up for my email list, and you'll get you'll get the link to the free story type quiz. And all right, and once you join my email list, you also get a lot of great things. I give out, I give out like writing tips, journaling prompts, and you get to be the first to know about new stuff that's coming up in the Inner Story Studio. So I would really love to see you there. All right, everyone. Thanks for watching, and hopefully I'll see you again soon.